Hi everyone. Welcome to our first quarterly online panel for engineering leaders. So, in this panel, we'll be having some really experienced engineering managers, engineering leaders from leading software companies across UK, Europe, and Asia. So, today we have some really amazing guests with us: Thomas, Oswaldo, Sarah, and Matthew. In this panel, this is the agenda. We'll start with a short introduction by Indorse. I'll give you a brief overview of what our community is all about, what these panels are all about. Then we'll have an intro by all the panelists, and that will follow the panel discussion. At the end, we'll have a question and answer session from the audience. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask those questions in the chat, and then Antonio can combine all the questions at the end, and we can ask them to the panelists one by one. So keep asking questions in the chat window. Great. So Antonio and the team at Indorse, including me, we have been running these roundtable sessions with engineering leaders from across the world, I would say. So we have leaders right from America to Europe to Asia, India, all these countries. So the leaders joining us are from leading tech companies, right? And in these sessions, you can get solutions for your engineering problems. So essentially, it's a peer-led session. You have discussions with your peers, and you can ask questions. You get answers to your pressing problems. And the best part is you can get answers from people who are already going through these things, right? So you can share knowledge, you can share insights, you can share tips with each other. So I think it's a great way of learning new skills. We have about 6 to 8 roundtables every week. Currently, we have more than 200 engineering leaders in this community, and it's highly active. It's very active. So most of the engineering leaders have joined multiple sessions until now, and I guess they are really happy with these sessions. Right? In total, we have more than 150 global companies represented in the community, and we are really excited about this. Some of the topics that we have discussed until now. So session one usually begins by discussing how to build high performing engineering team. Then we also go on to discuss about engineering and product operating models, operating structures. We also have a session about inner sourcing and coaching, coaching budding leaders, budding engineering managers, and solve a lot of problems for them. We will also be launching an exciting new initiative. I'll be talking about that at the end of this session. Yeah, and having said that, Indorse is the company. I'm the CEO of Indorse. We are running this community. So Indorse is a company which has an enterprise platform. We conduct upskilling for enterprise companies. We enable innovation for them by organizing online hackathons. And we also help them hire in bulk through these hackathons. So we have a presence in Singapore and the UK currently, and we are also expanding into India as we speak. Yeah, that's about Indorse. So let's start with the panel today. As I said, we have some amazing panelists, and let's start by some short intro by all the panelists, starting with maybe Sarah.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Sarah. I'm from Trustpilot. I've been an engineering manager there since January, and my passion really lies in building people up and helping them reach their full potential, and really focusing on their goals, team goals, the whole thing around that, and mixing and matching different kinds of styles to really fit the individual best. And that's me.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Just so that everyone knows, Sarah is really passionate about, as she said, employee feedback, one-on-one appraisals, and all these things. Next up is Matthew. Matthew has a great background in both the enterprise world and the startup world as well. Matthew.
Good day, everyone. Matt Sinclair. I'm partner and VP of engineering at BCG Digital Ventures here in London. Okay, a bit of background. I've been building software in various forms for probably 26 years, I think now, maybe 25, 26 years. If you can tell by my accent, most of that time was in Australia. I've been in the UK, just clicked over 5 years. Now here in the UK. In that time, in my whole career, I've built everything from flight simulators to haute couture fashion to e-commerce to cement delivery and pretty much everything in between. I spent a lot of time in financial services back in Australia, both in startups and banks and product companies. Since coming here to since coming here to London, we've built about 35 ventures of different kinds over the last 5 years. So it's about 7 a year we pump out. And I was CTO of Coop, the scooter sharing scheme down in Berlin in 2016, plus various other CTO roles on these ventures that we have here in London. These days, though, what I do is I refer to myself as principal of CTO school. So effectively, we build ventures, and my job, I have a team of venture CTOs, and my job's to get the crap out of the way so that they can be their best. Yeah, that's me.
Great, thanks, Matt. Next up is Oswaldo.
Hello, yes, my name is Oswaldo. You can call me Os. So a little bit about myself. I'm an engineering manager currently at Improbable, building game hosting platforms and all to do with online multiplayer games, which is an exciting area. In the past, I've been on a journey of building software for several years. Most of my background was Atlassian with the Jira team, where I spent many years with the team and watching Jira become what it is today. I've also spent some time on the CI/CD space from Atlassian days, and then to CloudBees. I spent some time also working on fintech at Monzo, and nowadays I'm working in Probable. My passion is high-performing development teams, and also on the product side, development tooling. Developers are the customer that is most interesting to me.
Great, thanks for that, Oswaldo. And the last one is Thomas.
Hi, I'm Thomas. My main experience is in e-commerce and price comparison. I spent nearly 14 years at Money Supermarket Group doing various roles. My passions are really the teams themselves, the output. And I'm also very interested in the last mile or continuous delivery, which my claim to fame is I got the book free from Jez Hummel and I can't remember, Dave Harley, is it? And I've got it signed by both of them, considering they live on either side of the Atlantic. So it's a good read. It's a bit boring, but it's a very useful read if you ever want to.
Great, thanks for that, Thomas. Let's begin with the panel discussion. So who do we start with first? So let's start with Oswaldo. Oswaldo, you said that you're passionate about the 20% innovation idea, right? So the first question that we got from some of our participants today is, how do you encourage developers to actually use this time, right? So a lot of companies have these initiatives, they have this time, but developers don't tend to use it. They keep doing their own work, like the normal job. So how do you go about that?
Yes, that's a super interesting question, and you could go on so many tangents with this one. But of course, in this setting, we're presuming already that you have, C-level buying into 20%. 20% is an institution within the company. It's valued, and the issue is that developers just do their day-to-day work whilst taking 20%. I've been there. At Atlassian, 20% is an institution, and it's heavily encouraged from all levels of management. So I think necessarily it is not a bad thing if your developers are using 20% to do day-to-day work. And I'll explain myself a little bit better now. It is a signal for you and your leadership team that we are basically having people use this. That's a signal that we are maybe putting the team under expectations of delivery that are not correct. Because otherwise, why would you use that time to keep working on the day-to-day? I found that the first challenge is actually getting people to take this time. Once it's taken, I'd love to see what they do with the time, because it is a feedback mechanism. Oftentimes in teams I ran last year, the time was spent doing technical depth work. And that was a signal for me and product managers that perhaps we are not accumulating enough technical depth on the day-to-day backlog. There's other signals that you can get from this. For instance, features that are completely off the roadmap and they show up in 20%. I saw them many, many times. Many Jira features that you might use today been born out of 20% time, and it is a signal for the product managers that, hey, look, maybe you should think about this when you're putting together the roadmap. So that's excellent. So I like it when you put no boundaries to what developers do during this time, and you really take a look at what they do as a signal to how they're feeling about the organization.
That's a great perspective, right? So I think the Google Doodles, right? That also came from the 20% time, right? Yeah, really interesting perspective.
So
Great.
I'm just curious if I can ask a question.
Yeah, sure,
Of
sure.
course.
This is a panel, right?
Yeah.
So what about, so I think some of the people I work with, at least, they sometimes go like, I don't know what to do. I have the creative ability to figure out what to do outside of this. How do you deal with those?
Yes, that's interesting, because I found that there's several types of engineers. There are archetypes, right? There's the slightly cowboyish engineer that loves to work on this new feature that's super cool. It's going to take over the world. Of course, the quality might leave something to be desired. And there are engineers that love really working on the infrastructure. They love technical challenges. But if you ask them to be super creative about coming up with product ideas, they might go like, oh, actually, we have PMs, right? And there are the troubleshooters, for instance, the ones that really like debugging super thorny issues. And it's like, I still remember an engineer I worked with, and I debugged this issue into the Java virtual machine, and it's actually a bug in the virtual machine. I've talked to people at Oracle and so forth and so forth, and they will have different projects, and that's okay. So one of the things I did with my team, one of my teams last year, was that we prepared before 20%. We prepared in one-on-ones, and we're like, okay, let's come up with a project idea. The project could be technical, it could be a feature. It really didn't matter, whatever drove their passion, right? And we treated it as a normal project. So they needed to get PM buy-in, they needed to get a designer if there was UX, etc. And I found it a super interesting development tool, so that they would learn what it is to lead, in the sense that their technical lead did, their product manager did, and get them to be more empathetic to what they do as a function. Seeing transformation for engineers, going like, oh, well, now I understand like what we need product managers or designers and so forth. So that's the way I used it. I thought it was useful.
So what you're saying is they didn't get to do it alone. They had to involve people.
Yes, exactly. They had to treat it as any project that their team worked on, which meant that they had to get PM buy-in, they had to get designer buy-in. If there was docs, they had to get a docs person involved. They had to have a real backlog for it, because the idea was to ship. It's not,
Oh.
experiments.
So essentially, the 20% time was also a group project or a team project in a way, right?
Yes, it was completely allowed. If you were able to get a couple people to use their 20% time to join you in this big scope project, you definitely could. And I encourage people to do so. That was the next level of difficulty. Not only does your 20% project need PM, designer, etc. It's big now. So now you gotta get other developers to say, I will give you my 20% time to work on this.
It's really interesting. I love the idea of using it as a signal. I'm a big believer in signals, and I think one of the real superpowers of a good leader is the ability to sort of know the right signals to look for and what to, when to pick up on. So that's a great point. The other thing I find really interesting there is you've really got a second order sort of understanding of 20% time, because the vast majority of people just heard about it from Google and they just say, right, you've got 20% time, and it's super ineffective. I was actually, before you said the second part of what you said, I was about to talk about DB. We had this thing called magic time. And I wanted it taken out the back and shot, because it was code for stealing from employees' free time. Like it was a terrible process. But what we came up with in response to that was this idea of being on the beach and then having a lifeguard. And so the job of the lifeguard was to look after the folks who are on the beach, and they did exactly what you described. We do exactly what you described. It's a way that you don't just get 20% time to sit at your desk and twiddle your thumbs. It's if you're on the beach, what you need to do is get together with a product manager and a designer and do something interesting that's got some. We actually don't put it into products typically. The magic time or the beach time that we're using is for internal stuff. Because the ventures are too sort of they're all consuming, but yeah. So I'm glad you added the second part to it, because I think that's pretty important. It needs to be coordinated for it to be effective.
I definitely agree. And one thing I've reflected on during the years is that, this practice originated in Google, or at least people understood it from Google. We kind of started doing it at the same time. I don't know if we copied them or not or whatever. And it is often seen, I've seen it several times, that people copy these things, and, Google does it. It's great, right? Like, let's do it. And there's often, not enough depth of why did Google do that? What was the context?
Yeah.
What were they trying to achieve? What was the problem that they were trying to solve? And so it's the same with monorepos, for instance. It's a solution to a problem. If you do not understand the problem and the context, it's very hard to run it successfully.
You're going to love my answer to my question based on that. There's a lot of cargo cult behavior in tech, and magic time is one of them for sure. Oh, sorry, 20% time is one of them.
Actually, on that point, Matt, let's come to you. So, right nowadays, everyone is talking about microservices. Almost every company out there, every serious company out there has microservices, right? But how do you avoid microservices becoming micromess, right? Or you also mentioned a term called microliths in one of our sessions. Can you talk more about that?
All right. I was chatting before this started that it wasn't my favorite question, but let me give it a go. I'm going to come clean. First of all, I'm not really an expert here. And it's not that I don't know anything about it. I spent a lot of time in the late 90s and the early noughties, pre-cloud, what we call cloud today, working on high performance distributed computing platforms. And so some of the cloud technologies that you see today were stuff that we were working on back then. So I've got an idea what's going on. But if you'll indulge me a little bit, let me turn the question around. So my issue with this whole topic area is actually a product management question as much as it is an engineering question. And so I think that it's initially a product management question because it's one about solving the right problem. So it's more about solving the right problem than it is about solving the problem right. Okay, so what do I mean? As all engineers, we have this tendency to want to solve problems. And if we don't have problems, then we make them up to solve ourselves, right? And if we're let loose. And then we want to use the most modern tech and the newest, fanciest things we can find, and sometimes even all at the same time. And sometimes even you want to do it using tech that you've got no experience in. You've seen this with engineers. They actually want to use a technology not because it's the right thing to do, but it's because they want to learn how to do something new. And it's all perfectly rational behavior from the perspective of engineering, or even from the perspective of a single engineer. But the fact, so basically I'm getting to my point slowly. This is what I mean by solving the right problem versus solving the problem right. Engineers are great at solving the problem right, well, many if not all, but far fewer are good at solving the right problem. And this is a very roundabout way to get back to the original question. Yes, microservices are all the rage, and perhaps for very good reason. But is this the first thing you should be thinking about when you build a new product? Now, I've got a very DV perspective on this because we're very early stage venture builders, and we're starting from scratch and going from 0 to 1 all the time. So your mileage may vary. Established product companies, different story. But this is my own perspective. But it is a choice of microservice architecture really the first problem you have when you're setting out in this space. So, and I suspect for the vast majority of problems that people solve, it isn't, right? And so this is why I coined this term microliths to explain this phenomenon to the folks at work, because you get both engineers and clients coming in and they've heard microservices, they've been sold on the idea, and it's all microservices this and microservices that. But the simple fact is there's just as much chance of getting into a mess with microservices as there is with monoliths, right? And for different reasons, but the outcome is the same. So practically speaking, I use this rule to help me kind of reason about this, which is group things together that change at the same speed. And why? Because rates of change is generally a good heuristic to use to know how to group and layer services together. Front ends typically change more often than back ends. Typically, core systems change relatively infrequently when compared to integrating systems in the middle of the enterprise, for example. In big businesses, it's not always possible to even assume a services environment. So microservices may be completely impossible. So we're doing work where we have to integrate with legacy stuff. Microservices might not be an option. There's a ton of compromises to be made. So knowing when to wrap and insulate versus cauterize and rebuild, it's not always obvious, right? So you need some miles and experience. So without going into the technical detail, the challenge that I think we have as leaders, engineering leaders, is to be conscious of this. Are we solving a problem that we actually have? And from the business point of view, is this a problem the business actually had? And I've managed to talk this long without mentioning a specific microservice technology, and I did that on purpose because I'd argue that things like Kubernetes and some of the other distribution technologies from microservices are massive overkill for the vast majority of problems. And I say this a lot at work. You are not Google or Facebook, to some of my engineers' chagrin. So with that in mind, what we strive to do at DV, at least in the very early stages of venture creation, is to borrow a phrase from Dan McKinley. And if you've not read this, I would thoroughly recommend it. It's fantastic. It's called Use Boring Technology. The website's boringtechnology.club. Now, it's a bit of a controversial phrase because sometimes when you're selling, it doesn't quite sound so cool that you're selling something that's boring. But from an engineering perspective, the idea is simply that what you want to do is, in the first instance, you want to make sure you're solving a problem you actually have. And for early stage ventures, it's, does anyone care about the thing I'm building? No users care about whether or not you're running on Kubernetes, right? What they care about is, are you solving a friction that they actually have? And I call this permission to succeed. And we'll go through this with the folks all the time. What we have to do is we've got to get permission to succeed. How do we do that? Well, we make sure we're solving a problem that someone cares about. It's a genuine friction. And we're getting some signals that there's product market fit. And once you're doing that, then you get the opportunity down the track to do some of these more sophisticated things with technology. So it's simply no use solving the problem of how to scale like Google or Facebook if you don't have a product or service that anyone cares about.
That's a great answer. So essentially, we have to take a step back and we have to look at the problem as a whole, right? We are like, okay, do we even need microservices here, right?
80% of the problems that we deal with, or 80 is probably, I'm just plucking the number out there, 60 to 80% of the problems that we deal with can be solved with a Rails app on Heroku, right? And I know that doesn't sound cool today for kids who want to use Kubernetes and whatever else, but the simple fact of the matter is the productivity of that stack is incredible. And if you're hunting for signals of product market fit, which is what you should be doing, right? It's really what you should be doing. Then that's a great way to get some proof points before you then go and build some enormous Kubernetes stack that takes a team of 8 people to keep running.
That is so interesting because I cannot agree with you more. And I've found the same issues with engineers now that you spoke of. I think if anything I would add is that we need to really look at what microservices are. They're distributed systems, right? We've been doing distributed systems forever. I remember even Corba, right?
Yes. Oh gosh, you're showing your age.
And the first law of distribution is if you don't need to do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
This was coined by Fowler, I believe. It is microservices an architectural pattern to reduce complexity, right? In a given context.
In one dimension. It reduces complexity in one dimension, but adds it in another.
Precisely. And there are many other tools in the arsenal of software engineering to minimize complexity and provide abstraction and capability of people to work on different things in a decoupled way. We mustn't forget those tools. So I think I can add to this question, like, let's suppose that microservices is the right answer for you. Let's assume that, right? How do you avoid the microlith, right? I've seen a couple of environments with some microservices, right? One of them you would even call nano services, right? And the silver bullet, again, doesn't exist. Microservices are not going to fix all of your problems, making sure that the code base does not deteriorate. We mustn't forget other tools to manage complexity, like unit testing, like contract testing, like end-to-end testing. There and I could go on. I've noticed a behavior that's microservices, a new service bullet, and if you got that, the rest of the lessons that we learned as an industry on how to manage complexity do not exist anymore. And actually, no, you could end up in some instances with micro spaghetti balls. Whereas, this service started as, you could basically make it a Lambda, but with maintenance, things start showing up. You wake up 2 years after and you look at the service and you go, oh my gosh. And if you had not used other tools to manage complexity, it's a spaghetti code.
In doing some prep for this, do you know this book?
Yeah, I read that. That's a good book.
It's a fantastic book, right? Sam Newman, good Aussie. In page 11, right? I've pulled it out, right? Page 11 basically says, be very, very careful. This is not he actually says it's not only is it not a silver bullet, it's not a golden hammer, right? It's a great line. And basically he spends the first sort of third of this book going through pretty meticulously that if you try and break up a service architecture before you know what you're doing, you get the seams wrong, right? You'll almost certainly get the seams wrong. And so that's this whole idea about permission to succeed. What you want to do is you get the functionality that you need to achieve product market fit, and then you start to see where the natural seams are in this thing before you break it up. If you break it up too early, it's wrong forever. It's very difficult to coalesce those seams later.
Yeah, I mean, when I've done microservices, from basically take a monolith into microservices, generally the rule of thumb is that service can it live on its own? Can you deploy it, or if it coupled to something else, it's not a microservice. And bake everything in. There are ways to do it, but it's not necessarily cheaper or easier to work with. You end up working out, well, I've got 20 services, which version works with which? And you're just in another world of pain. It's easier to have it in one code base.
And a ton of problems are database bound, right?
Yeah.
So you can have as many services as you like, but ultimately it's database bound anyway.
Yeah. I mean, generally, if you're very clever, most of the time you can get away with not using a database. There's nothing wrong with S3. So,
yeah.
Especially if you're starting fresh. But anyway.
Yeah, definitely. So Thomas, actually following on from the point of micromess or microliths, let's turn our attention to technical debt, right? So everyone, that's like the most dreaded thing for an engineer or an engineering manager, right? Technical debt. So how much technical debt should you accumulate and how much should you pay back? Is there like a golden standard for that? Or
there's no golden standard. Generally, I suppose there's two types of technical debt. There's one that you've actually knowingly taken on because you're trying to run fast. And then there's the other type of actually life's just moved on and you turn around and think, oh, that's not very good, is it? What we did a year ago or 6 months ago. And you need to, I would recommend you track it. I used to run a system where I'd have all the team leads log everything that they thought was technical debt, and we'd review it and we'd prioritize it and understand what we'd work on. And some technical debt is the team's debt. They are things, maybe a version of a framework or something along those lines. But there's other pieces that the team are just never going to be able to actually, just break up and deliver incrementally. And that's when you need to sort of pull out a project and go and take that, understand what the value is for the business, and go and deliver a piece of work around it. But in that case, definitely don't hide your technical debt. Be very clever and be visible with it. I think we were talking about like 20% time. Generally, I used to run. Always like to have sort of a 20% of time that's the team's time. It's not. Nobody, no product owner or anybody else is going to come along and take that time away from them. That's their time to say, well, yeah, we'll work on X, Y, and Z pieces of technical debt, or we're going to build this feature for ourselves so that we can be faster on delivery, or we can reduce our cycle time. I suppose cycle time's a good measure of how productive your team is and the cost of change in the application. I mean, tech debt. What is tech debt? If it doesn't slow you down, it might never be actually that much of a priority to fix. It might just be something that somebody's got a bee in the bonnet about. They just don't like it. You'll get people who, I just don't like the way this project's been written. Actually, well, do we change it very often? Do we do anything with it? When was it last released? You should always work on the areas. The tech debt we used to play down with the areas we were either working and changing regularly, or we knew, look, on the roadmap we're going to be touching this area. It's not going to be pretty for us if we don't do something to make it easier to work with. And I'd always just focus on that. But it goes back to the value and the why. If you don't know why you've got that piece of tech debt and the value, or how it's hurting you, and what value you could get out fixing it, effectively an ROI on it. What's your return on investment? It's all business, isn't it? You're all here to, everything you do is to solve a problem, either for internally in your team or for the wider business.
Great. Sarah, Oswaldo, any thoughts on this?
It's interesting that you've spoken of, Thomas, around cycle time, for instance, as being a signal of technical debt. And what I found really hard throughout the years is to actually measure technical debt directly. It's just incredibly hard to put objective measures to it. So you have some signals, but they're indirect, right? Like customer support contact rate. You have rate of incidents of different severities, right? So those things kind of let you know a little bit, but they might be influenced by other factors, not only what we call technical debt. Actually, the definition of the term itself is quite vague. You ask one engineer what it is, and he tells you a different answer from the other engineer that you asked. So no wonder product owners and product managers are skeptical around these things taking up time of the development team when they could be focused on delivery. And it's only in the long term that the effects are known. It's like, wow, why does it take even the smallest of pull requests to do in 4 or 5 days? Now we have to move to 3-4 week sprints, because the code base is so rotten that it's really, really, really hard to just make a simple change in a safe way. So the only workaround I've found for this situation is actually having a working agreement with the product owner and speaking to them about why we do these things. No data, but just having deep conversations, and for the product manager to be aware of why engineers desire these things. And basically it's based on trust. If these people trust their team, these product owners, product managers, technical delivery managers, all of these folks that are helping on the delivery side, so that we get that time. We also have gotten issues where, technical debt, yes, if there's no Jira issue, it doesn't exist, right? It has to be on a backlog. What doesn't have a Jira issue doesn't exist. even retrospective actions, if it's not logged anywhere with the team's backlog, it's very volatile whether it gets done or it doesn't get done. But then engineers, like in 20% time, right? They go like, oh my gosh, we have to ship the feature, even if it's logged in the backlog. Then it doesn't get done because, oh my gosh, new shiny feature. And I like forcing functions. So for instance, in one occasion, we had to establish, as part of the team's working agreement, look, we need to tackle at least X number of tickets of technical debt every sprint. Or after 6 sprints, we have an engineering sprint. Agreed with the PM, and it gets done. Otherwise, the pressure to keep shipping, especially in a dynamic environment, startup environment, it just doesn't happen.
So, I mean, I think that really ties into one of the questions that was asked in the chat. Like, I think it's extremely important to have it in a roadmap and be able to explain the value of tech, like fixing this tech debt, because you should be able to explain what the benefits are. If the benefits are that each we can deliver 10% faster, then that's going to be a compounding benefit that should be understandable for everyone, even if it takes some time to make. So I would say if you cannot explain the benefit of this of fixing the tech debt, you should go take a step back and wonder why you're doing it. And so, yeah, I would say definitely it should be part of the roadmap. It should be explainable to people what the benefits are so that it's clear. And that's a task on both us as managers and of the engineers.
Yeah, definitely. So Sarah, we have been talking about technical aspects. Now let's come back to the people aspects of business. Right? So I know you are really passionate about it, about one-to-ones, appraisals, and all these things. So one question we got from the participants today was, especially in the COVID-19 remote environment, right? So where we don't see each other for months on end, how do you keep one-on-ones engaging, and how do you motivate people in this environment?
So I actually think it's a really funny question, because for me, it's not really that different. It should be the same thing you do always. It should not just be something you do during one-on-ones. Sure, you do things slightly sure you do something slightly different remotely, but the standards of keeping people engaged in one-on-ones are the same. You need to have people have a clear idea of where they're going. So you need to bring that coaching element in, where you really take out the passion and really make sure you take that passion and turn them into concrete goals that they can work on. Then you use your one-on-ones each day. Each time you meet them, you use those one-on-ones to ask yourself, how can we push this further? What do they need to learn? What do they need to, which kind of projects can they do? So really using your future, like that overarching goal in each one-on-one to push forward. And then constantly bring it back to that. Constantly make sure that you're still on the right path. So for me, that's not really a big difference from that. The difference that comes is in the daily feedback and how you get information from your team. So you don't get those one-on-one. Bless you.
Oh,
That's it.
turn the video off. Apologies.
Sound, not video, remember? No, sorry. So where you need to really be aware is how you get feedback day to day and what you notice day to day, and how you get people to come with their problems to you. So one of the things I do around feedback now, where I would usually tell people if I heard something, if I said something, I tend to either use meetings right after to really emphasize what people are doing good using the 8 model. So what they did, which impact it has, what they should continue doing. And then I spend some time every day in the before I go off to really consider, is there something that they should know? Is there something they could benefit from? that I otherwise wouldn't have, that they otherwise wouldn't know. And then I sent them a message over Slack. And finally, yeah, we can talk about Slack another time. And then finally, I keep my desk open. So if people have something they need to talk about just for a quick call, that's always open, because that's the same as if someone came over to me. So they need to know that that I'm available for them when they need it. And the point is, they shouldn't feel like they have to wait until their one-on-ones, because then the time really gets dragged out and you don't really catch the issues immediately. They need to know that they can come to you in between as well. So that is my long answer to that.
Would you say that fast feedback then is important? So you've seen something, feedback as soon as possible.
I'm always trying to give feedback as fast as possible. The reason why I don't always do it in the moment is because sometimes you're busy, you need to jump from meeting to meeting. So that's why it's really important for me to give feedback at least once a day on what I've experienced. Because it is harder when you jump from meeting to meeting, because you don't get that walk time. So you can't give walk time. So you need to set time off to it, and sometimes it's just really good to do that in a structured way in the evening, where you just collect your thoughts.
So Sarah, on that point, just for the benefit of the audience, I definitely agree. Fast feedback is definitely useful, but how do you make sure that it doesn't sound like a snap reaction to something that they did? So what I mean is sometimes someone makes a mistake, right? And then instead of actually waiting for the one-on-one, if we immediately tell them, I have had that problem personally, right? So I try to compose myself, calm down if I'm irritated.
Yeah. So I think again, so I don't. So there's this thing called radical candor.
I was about to say.
Yeah, exactly. It can be really efficient, but you need to make sure that you have the trust of the one you give it to, because it can quickly turn into something else. But I think really it really depends on how you act in day to day. You need to have built up that trust, because then you can slack it down a little, and people don't take it as hard as. So I would say try not to make it personal. Remember, you're not commenting on who people are. You're commenting on what they do and what the impact is. So never ever try to be like, guess what people were trying to do, or assume what people are trying to do, because it's much better to hear from them what their intention actually was. So someone might have said something inappropriate, but they might not realize it. They might not have meant it like that. So it's better to say, you did this. I noticed you said this. What did you mean to do with that? Or like, what was your intention? And then so, well, I can understand your intention, but this is the impact it had on everyone else, and this the problem. So in order to prevent that in the future, you should try to do this instead. So you need, it's the 8 model, as I had mentioned before. So
sorry, Sarah, I thought you finished. Beg pardon.
No.
I was going to say, can I just build on that point? We had Kim Scott came and spoke to us, and so I'm a big fan of radical candor, and she gave a really, really simple technique that may address the question you asked, Gary. Rather than, if you've got feedback to give to someone, like the natural tendency is to go up and go, oh, you've got to give this feedback, and you did this thing, right, and whatever. But she said what you can do is it okay for me to give you some feedback? Like, actually preface the feedback with a question about whether you're saying, are you receptive to feedback at the moment? And if they are, fantastic, they're in the right mode and you can give the feedback. But if they're not, what you do then is you plan forward to have a moment at some point in the future where they will be ready for the feedback. And it avoids putting people on the spot and getting them defensive and uncomfortable. It's actually such a simple idea, but it's a very, very effective technique.
So that's a great idea. And adding on to that, Matt, what I have seen personally observed is if I have to give some critical feedback, in that case, getting on a quick call with them is really more effective than actually typing on Slack, because on Slack, as someone said, the intention becomes really, yeah.
I would say never give constructive or negative. So I never give that over Slack. Ever, unless it's something that they're working on and they want feedback on. Yeah. If it's something that, so be really careful about that at least.
It's the old praise in public and criticize in private, right? So I think it's perfectly appropriate to get onto Slack on the London engineering channel and go, hey, so-and-so, that was fantastic. I just had some positive feedback from the client about you and it was brilliant. And so everyone sees it. That's perfectly okay. But I would never go, hey man, hey dude, that you really screwed that up. I would never do that on a public forum. I would never do that on Slack, let alone a public Slack channel.
No.
I think you both have touched on really interesting topics, because I'm trying to go back to a question about, okay, the pandemic, right? We're all working from home and we're not remote working, we're pandemic working. It's definitely not the same. It depends on what part of the world you're at, but let's say life is not normal right now. Sarah, you're absolutely 100% right. It's the same techniques. It really doesn't change, but I do feel that we must be aware of the context that people are on right now, so that we focus or tailor our management approach to the current situation. By that, I mean, look, what's a word that people use nowadays for this? Pastoral care, right? Okay, caring about your people as human beings, kind of important if you're managing people, I think. I emphasize this more now that we are in this situation. It's unmistakable that the rapport building is not the same, especially if you have new employees or you're a new employee yourself. The resolution of video is not the same as human face-to-face contact. The resolution diminishes with the channel. So that's why Slack is a really bad medium for constructive feedback, because the resolution of the medium is less. Human-to-human communication already face-to-face is hard. I'm thinking something, I'm translating that into words, probably in a different language from a native language. You're hearing it, then you're translating it into something in your head. Already this communication channel is not 100% accurate. You add video, then you add text, it gets worse and worse and worse. That's why I love using emoji. It helps a little bit with text communication. It gives you an intent of the feeling of the person. That's why I encourage it completely. Make your mood be explicit. Otherwise, people will interpret it in the way that they will do. What can we do about this? I don't know. I've tried several things, right? So I can't go with people to a coffee shop now. Unfortunately, I love coffee or beer. I can't have beer. So I try to let them into my own situation. I show them my house. I show them my garden gym. I show them how I'm dealing with the pandemic. I invite them into my home. That's helping a little bit to build rapport. I started a new gig not too recently. And yes, that's helped a little bit. And just caring about their personal situation. But no doubt it's not 100% perfect. We have to admit that this is different.
I must admit, I lost one of my best tools in the pandemic, which was the walk and talk. So my one-on-ones, we have an office in Soho. My one-on-ones were, let's go for a walk around the block. And there's actually some interesting biological advantages to walking. When you're thinking, it triggers certain kinds of hormones in the brain, and it actually puts your brain into a certain kind of mode, which you don't get if you're sitting across the table. It's also much less confrontational. So I lost that, which is a bit of a shame. But in the question that you asked me, Gaurav, it was how do we motivate engineers in this time? And I really liked what Sarah said, because I actually wrote down, I know these are epically weird times. But I think that some of the things that have served me well normally have also served me pretty well in these crazy times. So apart from losing my ability to do the walk and talk, and I haven't got a good substitution for that. Every now and again, my dog comes in, and I put my dog on a Zoom call, and that tends to break the ice a bit. But beyond that, I haven't really found a substitute for the walk and talk. But the things that I have found that have worked in the past are still working, more or less, right? And so I had this thing about always try and think in terms of why, what, how. Right, and it's not the Simon Sinek, which is why, how, what, because he's trying to sell stuff. This is a bit of a spin on that. So it's the job of leaders to explain why you're here. It's you then collaborate with your peers about what you're going to do, and then you get the hell out of the way and let the folks that you've hired work out how they're going to go and do it. And I try and sort of instill that into everyone all the time. It's why, what, how thinking. The other thing, which is, and this is far from original, but it's have a simple set of values for the way you operate and try and live by them. And I would recommend you not copy mine or anyone else's, but to actually come up with your own. And that act of intentionality is really important in that process. And so for me, I've had these six values for a while that I've kind of hung on to. And first one is trust first. I make a point of trusting people a priori without needing any evidence to do that. If that fails, then I have a different strategy to cope with it. But my general interaction model is to trust first. It's served me very well. The second one, and this is probably the most important, this probably should be first, but it's assume best intentions. And this is particularly important on Slack messages and email and stuff where you've had that lossy communication channel. Try and put yourself in the frame of mind. Like, what could this person possibly have meant? How could I frame this in the best possible light to not get pissed off with what they've said, and that again, that stuff that served me well. I'm a big believer in people first, work next. In my career, I've found that great people do great work, and so prioritize in that order. Put folks first, and then the work follows. I just totally stole the fourth one, which is care personally, challenge directly, from Kim Scott, because it's such a good orientation. Be a builder. I have this view that you should always assume that people can be better than they are, right? And so it doesn't matter what's going on. You can have I don't actually think these people exist, but let's just, for the sake of the argument, your 100x rockstar programmer and your 1x, right? Both of those people can still be better than they are today, and your job as a leader is to make that happen. And then the last one is favor legacy over empire. And I don't mean legacy code. Empires come and go. But the real value is leaving the place better than you found it. And so that's every day I get up and I think, okay, what have I done today that's going to leave engineering at DV better than how I found it? So those values have served me well. And then the last two are not really values, but just sort of things that I do is you have to be vulnerable. For people to trust you, you've got to have a bit of vulnerability. The sort of, I think the days of the command and control Iceman, and it was generally a man leader, I think they're gone. And you have to be vulnerable. You have to be able to have authentic conversations with people about how you feel about things. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but I really believe that. And the last one, and this has really served me very well at DV because I'm blessed with a fantastic team of people, is get out of the way. Right, the vast majority of people that you come across in tech actually know what they're doing. All right, and what they don't know is what they're missing is the imprimatur of a leader to say that's the right thing to do. So I get out of the way. I let them come to me and they say, I've got this problem. What do you think? And sometimes we might have to do a whiteboard session on it, but generally they've got the answer, and all they're looking for is like the opportunity, the room, the space to go and be their best. So that hasn't changed for me under pandemic conditions versus being physically co-located.
That's a great way, great insight. Thanks for that. So I think we have 3 minutes. So let's quickly answer one question that just came in. A really good question. What is the hardest lesson you have learned as an engineering manager? So any one of you can take up this question. What is the hardest lesson you have learned?
I'm gonna pick this one up.
Sure.
I think the hardest thing I learned as an engineering manager is that I cannot always do the right thing for my team because the structure for it isn't there from leadership. I think that's the hardest thing I've learned, that I cannot control that, and sometimes I have to make subpar decisions and figure out another way.
Yeah, 100% least worst optimization is the bane of my life, right? What's the least worst thing I can do here, because the constraints don't allow me to do the best thing. Yeah, 100%.
Great. So any final thoughts to add before I go on to the last slide? Thomas, Oswaldo? No?
One final point on this topic, because I think it's really interesting. I get a lot of folks who ask me to help them be CTO, venture CTO or CTOs, right? Or they're moving into leadership. And one of the things that you have to learn, and it's really hard, I learned this lesson very hardly, is you have to find a way to nourish your creative, I don't know what it is, like your creativity by proxy, right? But as you move into leadership, you go from being responsible for doing stuff to being responsible for people who are responsible for doing stuff. And the further up the food chain you go, the more remote and the more sort of removed you are from that, which is a problem. And I try, I have other ways to deal with that, but learning to be able to nourish your creative requirements by proxy is a superpower that you need to learn to be a good leader. Otherwise, you just constantly have your hands in the way, getting in the way of people. So I learned that lesson very hard. It took me 10 years longer than it should have.
Yeah, that's a great way to end the session. So last slide, actually following on to what you just said, Matt. So just to give you some context onto this new initiative that we're doing with the same community that we have is, as we kept on doing roundtable discussions over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 months, we started getting requests, Antonio and I, that, hey, I have this particular problem that I need to be solved. So these requests are actually coming from engineering managers. Some of them are junior, some of them are mid-level, right? So they want to actually solve one problem that they have, or a set of problems that they have. So we are coming up with this amazing initiative. What we are going to do is we'll have a pool of some experienced engineering leaders as mentors or coaches. I'm calling them coaches, not really mentors. So this pool, we'll have this pool. And on the other side, we'll have some budding leaders or anyone essentially who has a problem or a problem statement. So they can create a nice little small case study or a problem statement and submit that statement to this group of mentors or coaches. And you will be able to have one-on-one calls with one of these coaches essentially. So let's see how that works out. We'll be launching this starting next week. Antonio will be reaching out to the whole group. Yeah, that's the latest thing with Indorse. Cool. I think we are finishing right on time. I think that's my superpower. To finish right on time, 5 p.m. So yeah, this was a great discussion. Thank you again, all 4 of you, Thomas, Oswaldo, Sarah, and Matt, for joining us on this panel. Yeah, thanks everyone for participating in this.